Hello everyone and welcome to this demonstration video about how to create entities for the game using the entity editor. Before you get started, you'll need to have converted your model into a CSV file format using the model converter tool, and you can watch a video on how to do that by clicking on the link on the screen now. Once you've done that, the model file should end up in the models folder in the repository, so you can leave it there, but you'll also need to put the texture that you want to use into the textures folder. So now you can get started by running the entity editor, and you can start work on a new entity by going to File and then New Static Entity. I'm not going to be showing you how to make animated entities quite yet because I'm actually going to be redoing the animation system in January, and I'll probably change the way that animated entities are created, so don't make any animated entities for the game yet. So now you need to set the ID for the entity, and this is also going to be the name of the entity file. Then you can load up the model by clicking Choose Model and selecting the model that you want to use from the list. Now select your main texture for the model and select this setting here if your texture contains transparency. You can also disable lighting on your model if you want, but you rarely need to do that. You can also set the shine and reflectivity of the model here, and if you want to use a specular map or indicate that some parts of the model are glowing, then you can add an extra texture map by clicking here. Don't do this if you don't need it, because I haven't actually added a way to remove the extra map once you've added it, so you'll be a bit stuck. If you do make an extra map, then the red channel is used as the specular map, where higher values of red represent higher reflectivity, and the green component determines whether a part of the object glows or not, with green values of over 0.5 representing a glowing area. You'll also have to turn on glowing if you want to use this feature. If you're not sure about using the extra map, then don't use it at all, it's not a problem. You can probably leave these settings here as they are, unless you specifically know that the object is going to be found underwater, in which case you can turn this on, or if your entity is very small, then you can turn off the reflection so that it renders a bit faster in game. The visibility and radius settings you can probably leave as they are. Down here you've got the preview settings, all pretty self-explanatory, so we can move on to adding components. To add a component, just select it from the list and click Add. I'll be adding loads more components in the future to the entity editor, and if you have any suggestions for components that I should add, then do let me know. So for particle effects, you first need to start off by choosing a particle texture atlas. If you want to create your own particle atlas, that's fine too, and there's another short video that you can watch here that shows you how to do that. Otherwise, you can let me know what particle effect you need, and I'll hopefully be able to find someone who can create it for you. The rest of the particle settings should be fairly obvious and easy enough to figure out, but just be aware that particle targets still need a bit of work done on them, so they might not work perfectly for you just yet. Also, if you have more than 10,000 particles spawned at any time, then it will get very unhappy and the particles will all freeze, so make sure that your particles per second and life settings aren't too high. The sound looper is fairly self-explanatory. You can create a list of sound effects by adding sound effects which you've put in the sound effects folder in the repository, all of which must be non-stereo .wav sounds. Then the entity will emit a random sound from the list after a certain amount of time determined by this slider, and you can add a random extra amount of time between sounds by increasing this slider. Light components are also pretty easy to use, but if possible just use the glowing texture instead, because we can only have a limited number of light sources in a scene at any one time. I'll also be adding support for a bloom effect in the future, so glowing textures will actually look like they're emitting light even when they're not. So when possible, don't use the light component. And finally, the collision component. If you want your entity to be solid, then you need to create a collision box for it, which you can do in Blender. So in Blender, create the collision boxes around your entity. You can actually make this any shape, it doesn't have to be a box, but if possible just use a box because it makes the collision calculations so much more simple in the game. Once you've put your boxes around the entity, export each collision box separately in the usual way to an OBJ file, and put these OBJ files in the collision objects folder in the repository. You'll now be able to add them in the collision components tab. If you scaled up your model when importing it in the model converter tool, then you'll also need to scale up your collision boxes here. So if you'd like to make some entities for the game, then there is a list of entities that I've put a link to in the description, and you can use that to choose which entities you'd like to create. Or if you think of something else that you think would look good in the game, then you can make that and I'll add it to the list. If you choose to start working on a certain part of an entity, then it would be great if you could leave a comment in the relevant cell by right-clicking and choosing Insert Comment, just to let me and everyone else know that you're working on it. When you're done, send me the blend file for the model, or the OBJ file if you're not using Blender, and also the entity file that you've created. You can find the entity files in the Entities folder of the repository after you've saved an entity. So that is it. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I am very excited about getting your entities into the game very soon.